By now, we've all seen the new trailer announcing Total War Pharaoh. Opinions are mixed on whether the game will be good, but the question on everyone's mind right now is this trailer historically accurate? Now, I've been podcasting about ancient Near Eastern history for the last few years, and from my research, a few things in the trailer immediately stand out to me. So let's dive right in. Judging from how these pyramids are laid out, we're looking at the Great Pyramids of Giza. That's the big famous ones everyone's heard about. Now, they weren't close to the Nile River. If this is supposed to be the Nile River, it's not. They did have a canal running up to them, but this does appear to be a little bit too wide to really be that. It looks like a river, let's be honest. And see that pathway running from the river to that central pyramid. Most of that space in the central pathway in many reconstructions is empty. The pyramids were not a place you went to all the time. There wasn't a whole bunch around there after the construction. That said, I have seen some reconstructions where the whole space is very busy, and of course, if you look at them nowadays, they've certainly got quite a lot going on. That's modern Giza around the modern pyramids. But overall, it might be a bit too cluttered, but it looks nice. And it's got a shot of both the most iconic pyramids and the most iconic river, and it definitely sets the scene, so we can sort of give this a bit of a pass on the grounds of looking cool. So the town is quite shiny here, we can see that, and from the release materials, this is set up at the transition between the 19th and 20th dynasties of Egypt. And so while things are about to get bad, there have been a few really good centuries for Egypt overall at this point. And so all the monuments should in fact be in tip-top shape right about now. That's great. We come on down in our trailer to the humble dung beetle, or more reverently, scarab beetles. And of course, these are real things, and indeed they still are. And this is how they move around, and this is how they roll poop all over the ground. So points all there. Now, of course, scarab beetles do feature in Egyptian mythology. It's involved with the sun. It's kind of like he's moving the sun along its path in the world. And they do actually fight over poop balls in a way that kind of looks like this. Oh, isn't that fantastic? Now, the real fights are actually a little bit faster, a little bit more intense. They can really throw each other pretty far if you watch the historical documentaries. I think they've slowed it down a bit to make it seem more believable, but I think going a little more intense might have been more realistic. But of course, the beetle here is a metaphor for the entire time period. The kings of this era spent a long time building up structures of dirt, mostly mud, brick, and stone, and they fought over them endlessly. But then, of course, from out of nowhere, the massive threats of the Bronze Age collapse show up and wreck the whole poop ball. And by poop ball, I mean international economy, which stretched from at least Greece to Afghanistan, and probably more. But I also mean great empires. Just as poop balls are rich in vitamins for these beetles, they're also rich in symbolism for the Total War franchise. Anyway, coming back here, this is probably our most telling scene. We have a solid panoply of war gear laying around some corpses. Up in the top left, I see a chariot wheel, also a bit on the top right-ish. And of course, chariots are the major weapon of war at this point. I see some straight swords both laying in the ground, and I also see, of course, our Pharaoh is holding one. Though the classic Egyptian sword that we think of is the khopesh, which is the classic curved sword, and indeed the little Total War logo guy actually has one in his hand. Most of the swords in this era would have been straight. kind of like the ones we see here, so points there. Also, there are spears and arrows. Spears would of course been far more common than swords, but we're assuming if the Pharaoh's sitting here, then all these dead people, a lot of them are probably pretty important. They can afford the swords, and spears, arrows, pretty generic. They look good. Points all around here. Now, the dead guy to the left of the pharaoh looks pretty good as an Egyptian guy. Take a look at this ancient illustration. He's got no shirt, or sometimes they've got like a cross bracer thing going on their shirt. He's wearing a skirt thing. He's got that sort of sack on his head. That was the fashion at the time. But then the guy on the right of the pharaoh, he's wearing pants. And it's far less common to see that in Egyptian art. I did look that up. I'm not a clothing specialist, but it's not, you don't see a lot of pants in the ancient Near East for just whatever reason. You see tunics, you see skirt things. That hat next to him, though, with the frilly bits on it, that is a Sea People's hat. Check out this Egyptian art of a Sea People guy. Either he has a hat just like in the video, or he's got something real crazy going on with his hair here. And people do actually argue about whether this is a hat or a hairstyle. We don't really know. Anyway, then we get to this guy. Not the scarab, this guy. Judging from the promotional materials, this is meant to be Pharaoh Ramesses III. And he looked like this guy, which, close enough. This is him at peace. This is his grandfather, Pharaoh Ramesses II, at war. And so clearly they've copied a lot off of this general style, and who knows exactly what he would have looked like. This is all sort of schematic diagrams, so this could be what he looked like. It's pretty good. Points here. Now, Ramesses III is not quite as famous as Ramses II, but he is the last great king of the New Kingdom period. He was a real guy. He really did sweat in the sun, and he probably participated in battles, so points there. Now then we see an army coming towards him, and we saw the scarab going up in the sun. That's more religious imagery. And in the background we see, is that like maybe a sandstorm brewing? That's supposed to be one of the new gameplay features. Very excited for that, apparently. But then the pharaoh calls his army, and we get to the clash. But before the clash, we see that neither of these armies is really in any sort of formation, which is really bad form. Egypt had a well-organized army at this point, and while they probably didn't have parade lines at this point in the battle, they should be more organized. See these guys holding up these sticks? The people should be gathered around one of those sticks. That's how you know which unit you're in. It's not just a video game convention. That's a real thing. You have these banners for a reason. I mean, they're more sticks than banners, but it's the same thing. The banners shouldn't all be clustered around up at the front. They should be more spread out, and the people should be around them. Egypt has partially a professional army, but even the militiamen should have been a little more trained than this. We do see down in the bottom left some guys with Kopesh curved swords, a whole unit of them. It's more of like a sidearm or something that the nobility would carry, but of course it's Total War. You gotta have some kind of unit diversity somewhere. But most of the guys in the frame, especially this big chunk on the bottom here, they've got these medium-sized shields and maybe like 6-foot spears, 5-foot spears, something like that. They're wearing skirts. Some of them don't have shirts on or very light shirts. The costumes seem right as far as I can tell from this pretty poor angle. Now on the other side of the battle, I'm seeing some javelins, I'm seeing some round shields. These are overall lighter troops, though just as disorganized. If these are the Sea People, I assume these are the Sea Peoples coming in, mostly based off those helmets we saw. Should they be more disorganized? We don't actually know. Opinions differ on how the Sea People waged war, but it does look good. So, points in general. But as the trailer fades away, let's look at one last thing. We look in the background and we notice that the city is burning. Except that these armies, they're fighting outside of the city. And this isn't how ancient battles worked. Now, if the fighters were outside the city should be untouched. If the attackers push the Egyptians here all the way to the walls, or if there's no walls in this town into the city itself, then there might be street-to-street fighting. But they're not there yet. If they were in the city, the Egyptians would be in the city, or they would have already lost and they would have fled. The Egyptians wouldn't keep defending a town that's already been sacked. The town should not be burning until well after the battle, unless the Egyptians themselves are just burning their own city for some crazy reason. Now also, if this is Giza, and those are sea peoples and not one of the rebel armies of Egypt, there were some rebellions and civil wars at the turn of the dynasty, but if they are sea peoples, the sea peoples weren't known to have reached all the way to Giza. Now, it is total war, so presumably any faction does have the potential to reach anywhere on the map, but as far as historical accuracy goes, it's points off for this whole scene here, except maybe for the costumes, and I guess points because they're in the desert, it's Egypt, okay, you get points for there. But to be fair, it does look good. And it does spend about half its runtime on scarab beetles, which is fun, so I can't be too hard on something that's supposed to look good. Now, these Total War guys, as we know from their previous installments, they're really capable of doing their homework on this historical stuff. They have impressed me sometimes in the past. Of course, we also know that they're just as capable of ignoring that homework for the sake of something that looks cool. We've definitely seen that in the past. Overall, it looks a lot more grounded than the stuff we've seen with Three Kingdoms, with Troy, especially with Warhammer. I do like the more fantastical elements, but they're going for a historical thing here. They seem to be doing overall a pretty good job of it, even if, judging by this trailer, some things might be off. Anyway, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing more of this. I've been running a podcast on this whole period for about 3.5 years at this point. You can start listening to the late Bronze Age stuff at episode 58. We're at episode 115 now, I think. We got a lot of podcasts. But I'm going to be doing in-depth bonus features talking about the lore specifically of Total War Pharaoh coming up. So make sure you like this, make sure you subscribe, you get your notifications in so that you can learn more about the history and overall lore of all these characters that are coming in for Total War Pharaoh. Thanks for watching. I think it's going to be good.